In the autumn of 1980, just weeks before the world would lose him, John Lennon sat down for one of his final interviews. When asked about Paul McCartney's latest work with Wings and whether his former bandmate ever surprised him creatively, Lennon's answer was both revealing and grounded. No, he never surprised me. I mean, how could he? He's like my brother, has been since we were 15. That simple remark spoke volumes. For John and Paul, their bond ran deeper than bandmates. They were, in many ways, family. Even 10 years after the Beatles disbanded and each member charted their own course, that unspoken connection still pulsed beneath the surface. Despite the mountain of books and documentaries written about their relationship, the essence of John and Paul's dynamic was quite straightforward. They respected each other, admired one another's talents, even if their personalities didn't always align. Raised in the post-war neighborhoods of southern Liverpool, both were swept up by the tidal wave of American rock and roll at exactly the same time. That shared spark would ignite a revolution. They had an almost psychic connection. One look, one smirk, one sarcastic eyebrow raised. It was enough. Words weren't necessary. Musically, they were a match made in harmony. Their voices, so different yet perfectly blended, became the core of the Beatles' sound. And unlike many other bands of their time, the Beatles weren't built around one frontman. They operated as a true unit. Mick Jagger once famously described them as a four-headed monster, and at the center of that beast, quietly steering its direction, were John and Paul. George Harrison, in later years, described the subtle hierarchy within the band. There was an unspoken attitude. John and Paul led the charge, while George and Ringo followed their lead. Not by force, not by command, but by sheer gravity of their presence. Together, John and Paul formed one of the greatest songwriting duos in music history. They fueled each other, pushed one another, challenged each other, always striving to outdo the last hit. Never bitter rivals, always creative equals. Their story began in 1957, when a young McCartney was invited to join Lennon's skiffle group, the Quarrymen. And from those early days in church halls and youth clubs, all the way through the groundbreaking albums of the mid-60s, from Revolver to Sgt. Pepper, they remained each other's artistic compass. But just as the band was scaling new heights, someone new entered John's life. A force he hadn't encountered before. Yoko Ono, a conceptual artist from Tokyo with deep roots in London's underground art scene. Their meeting at the Indica Gallery in 1966 sparked an intense and immediate connection. Though both were married and parents, something undeniable passed between them. Their romance wouldn't truly begin until 18 months later, but when it did, it was unstoppable. When Cynthia Lennon came home from a vacation earlier than expected, she walked into a life that had already changed without her. John and Yoko had become inseparable. And with that, one of the Beatles' unspoken rules was broken. No significant others in the studio. Yoko's constant presence at Abbey Road unsettled the rhythm of the group. Ringo, the peacemaker and the last to join, took it in stride. But for Paul and George, her being there during sessions was a disruption, unfamiliar, awkward, uncharted. Paul would later admit he didn't know how to address it. On one hand, he felt his creative partnership with John slipping away. On the other, he didn't want to offend them. It was a delicate dance he wasn't prepared for. In a candid interview with Howard Stern, McCartney said, "Let's be honest. We didn't welcome Yoko in the studio. It felt like a guy thing. Our wives didn't do that. maybe a quick visit to the control room, but never sitting in the studio itself. It was just unheard of. So yeah, it made things tense. Still, time has a way of reshaping understanding. Paul later reflected with humility. This wasn't a regular relationship. Yoko's not a regular woman. And John was in love. We eventually accepted it. Not without difficulty, but we did. I can see now he had every right to bring her. Maybe it could have been handled better, but that's hindsight. In the years after John's tragic death in December 1980, Paul and Yoko began to bridge the gap. Paul has since acknowledged that he misjudged her during those difficult final Beatles days. Despite public narratives to the contrary, he's been clear. Yoko did not cause the Beatles to break up. By then, the cracks were already forming. The group had reached its natural conclusion, even if they didn't fully recognize it at the time. As Paul put it, she didn't break the band was breaking. She just came into John's life at a moment when he needed a seismic shift, and she gave him that. And perhaps most poignantly, Paul admitted, "I thought she was cold." But she's not. She's the opposite. She's strong, she's loving, and she's herself. I was wrong about her. In the end, what remained between John Lennon and Paul McCartney was something far greater than fame, greater than music, and greater than even the Beatles themselves. It was an enduring bond, forged in youth and tested by time, that ultimately survived the storms of change. Though love, ego, ambition, and the arrival of new people in their lives shifted the course of their journey, neither man could ever truly let go of the other. Paul's later reflections on Yoko Ono revealed not only his growth, but his understanding that John's choices came from a deep place of personal need, not betrayal. And through the haze of fractured years and unfinished conversations, what resonates now is not the silence that followed their final days as a band, but the eternal sound of their harmony, a creative brotherhood that shaped modern music and continues to echo in every chord, lyric, and memory they left behind.